The 1970s were a decade of shadows and extremes. Hollywood balanced blockbusters with gritty films that pushed too far, daring stories that blurred the line between art and exploitation. Some shocked audiences, others terrified studio executives. Many were quietly pulled, whispered about, or left to rot in vaults. But decades later, they returned as cult treasures. Ready to see the movies Hollywood tried to bury? Let's dig into 12 that refused to die. Number 12. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. When it premiered, Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS was treated as pure cinematic poison, reviled, dismissed, and whispered about in underground circles. Critics wrote it off as tasteless trash, but audiences couldn't forget it. Set in a Nazi prison camp, it tells the story of a ruthless warden who conducted inhumane experiments on prisoners. The premise was both sensational and terrifying, riding on the public's lingering unease with World War II horrors. The controversy began instantly. In several countries, the film was banned outright. Germany, Canada, and Australia never allowed it to screen legally. Even in the US, theaters pulled it after community protests. Rumors swirled that Universal Studios, who technically owned the backlot where the film was shot, quietly distanced itself, fearing lawsuits and reputational ruin. Hollywood executives pretended the film didn't exist, hoping silence would kill its memory. Behind the scenes, production was rushed and chaotic. The budget was barely there, the crew scavenged costumes from secondhand stores, and the director reportedly encouraged actors to improvise disturbing moments. Critics shredded it upon release, calling it dangerous propaganda masquerading as cinema. But here's the twist. The movie refused to die. Bootleg VHS tapes circulated in the 1980s. Cult midnight screenings drew packed crowds who cheered at its sheer audacity. Today, it's dissected by film scholars as a strange, disturbing artifact of the 70s exploitation boom. In the end, Ilsa survived because it embodied the era's darkest obsessions. Hollywood tried to bury it, but audiences kept digging it back up. Proof that some stories are too shocking to vanish. Number 11. Mandingo, 1975. On the surface, Mandingo was sold as a historical drama, but audiences quickly realized it was something far more dangerous. The film explored the brutality of slavery in the American South, following a plantation owner and his relationships with enslaved people. While marketed as prestige, it played more like raw exploitation, mixing themes of power, betrayal, and cruelty in ways Hollywood had long avoided. The backlash was swift. Critics like Roger Ebert declared it racist trash. Newspapers accused the studio of exploiting human suffering for ticket sales. Some theaters refused to book it, fearing riots. Hollywood PR teams scrambled, labeling it provocative rather than exploitative, but the damage was done. Behind closed doors, Paramount executives reportedly wished they'd never greenlit it. Filming itself was controversial. Actors later admitted to discomfort during some of the more graphic scenes. Rumors circulated that extras walked off set, unable to stomach the material. Studio memos hinted at executives warning theaters about potential volatility from screenings in the South. Yet the film didn't disappear. Instead, it became a strange cultural flashpoint. College campuses screened it in the 1980s as an example of exploitation disguised as history. Modern critics now revisit it as a flawed but bold attempt to confront racial violence, albeit through sensationalist storytelling. The legacy of Mandingo is messy but unforgettable. Hollywood tried to bury it under shame, but history unearthed it as an uncomfortable relic, proof that exploitation often hides inside prestige's clothing. Number 10. Cannibal Holocaust, 1979. Few films earned the title the most banned movie of all time, like Cannibal Holocaust. Released at the tail end of the 70s, it was marketed as a brutal survival story of filmmakers lost in the Amazon. But what audiences saw was something else entirely, an unflinching blend of documentary-style realism and shocking violence that left theaters in chaos. Controversy erupted instantly. In Italy, the director was arrested on obscenity charges. Authorities believed the film depicted actual deaths, forcing him to bring actors into court to prove they were alive. Countries like the UK, Australia and Norway slapped bans on it, some of which lasted for decades. Rumors of snuff film authenticity only made it more infamous. The behind-the-scenes story was no less chaotic. Filmed in the Amazon with a tiny crew, production was grueling. Actors battled infections, swarms of insects, and near starvation. The director pushed for realism, and some crew members later distanced themselves from the project, horrified by what had been captured. Critics at the time condemned it as vile and unwatchable. But by the 1990s, VHS bootlegs turned it into a forbidden object, passed between horror fans like a dangerous secret. Today, it's considered a landmark of found footage cinema, influencing films like The Blair Witch Project. Hollywood never acknowledged it, pretending it belonged to a world far outside their polished system. But its shadow lingers. Cannibal Holocaust proved that once an image is burned into memory, no ban or studio silence can erase it. Number 9. The Big Doll House, 1971. When The Big Doll House hit screens in 1971, it looked like just another low-budget exploitation flick. But what audiences got was a wild, provocative ride through a women's prison in the Philippines. Marketed as gritty entertainment, it was actually a lightning rod of controversy. Laying the groundwork for an entire subgenre, Hollywood never wanted to acknowledge women in prison films. The story followed inmates rebelling against a sadistic warden, shot with grit and sleaze in equal measure. The prison wasn't just a setting, it became a stage where power, violence, and desperation played out in shocking detail. What elevated the film was Pam Grier in one of her earliest breakout roles, radiating raw charisma that audiences couldn't ignore. But controversy was never far. Community groups labeled it immoral. Critics dismissed it as trash. Studio executives, while enjoying the unexpected profits, treated it like an embarrassing stepchild, profitable but too dangerous to promote openly. Many theaters pulled it after angry letters from watchdog groups. The Philippine locations stirred their own uproar, with rumors that authorities pressured the crew to leave due to bad publicity. Behind the scenes, production was barely controlled chaos. The budget was tiny, the conditions harsh, and actors later admitted they weren't sure if the film would ever be released. Yet it was. And against the odds, it struck gold at the box office. Audiences packed midnight screenings, cheering the rebellion against authority, even if critics rolled their eyes. The legacy is undeniable. The Big Doll House launched Pam Grier as a star, and Roger Corman as a kingpin of grindhouse cinema. While Hollywood tried to bury its existence under embarrassment, the film's DNA spread into countless cult favorites. It was exploitation at its rawest, but also a strange kind of empowerment. Dangerous, messy, unforgettable. Number 8. Fight for Your Life, 1977. When Fight for Your Life premiered in 1977, even hardened critics were stunned. Billed as a home invasion thriller, it dove headfirst into racial tension, cruelty, and raw violence with almost no filter. What seemed like another exploitation entry quickly became one of the most controversial American films of the decade. The story followed 3 escaped convicts who terrorize a black family in their home. What made it explosive was its relentless barrage of slurs, psychological torment, and shocking violence. For audiences, it wasn't just a movie. It was a powder keg reflecting real racial tensions in the 1970s America. Censorship came swiftly. In the UK, the British Board of Film Classification refused to grant it a certificate, effectively banning it. In the US, several theaters pulled the film after protests, and distributors often avoided mentioning its title in advertisements. Hollywood kept its distance, with studios labeling it too hot to handle. Behind the curtain, production was as turbulent as the film itself. Rumors swirled that cast members walked off set, disturbed by the content. Community leaders in certain cities picketed screenings, demanding it be pulled. Some whispered that the film's controversy was deliberately stoked by its producers as a marketing ploy. Scandal as currency. Despite, or because of, this firestorm, Fight for Your Life survived. Bootleg copies circulated for years, and horror. Conventions later resurrected it as a forbidden gem. Today, scholars analyze it as a shocking but raw snapshot of racial anxieties that mainstream Hollywood refused to tackle head-on. In the end, the film was too volatile to fade. It's remembered as both dangerous and vital, a movie that Hollywood buried, only for history to dig up as a painful but essential reminder of the 70s. Number 7. The Last House on the Left, 1972. Wes Craven's The Last House on the Left began life as a low-budget revenge thriller, but it became a defining moment in American exploitation cinema. The tagline said it all: "To avoid fainting, keep repeating. It's only a movie." For audiences, the line wasn't just a warning, it was survival. The film told the story of two teenage girls kidnapped and brutalized by a gang, and the subsequent vengeance carried out by the girls' parents. Its graphic realism shocked audiences who expected traditional horror thrills. Instead, they were confronted with something far more raw and unsettling. Censorship boards worldwide pounced. In the UK, it was banned outright, joining the infamous list of video nasties. In the US, some states cut minutes of footage or refused to screen it altogether. Even drive-ins reported walkouts, with patrons demanding refunds. Hollywood's major studios dismissed it as dangerous trash, distancing themselves from Wes Craven, who would later redefine horror with A Nightmare on Elm Street. Behind the scenes, the film was born from chaos. The budget was microscopic, the cast largely unknown, and the crew stretched thin. Rumors spread that actors were deeply uncomfortable with the intensity of certain scenes. Even Craven himself later admitted he wasn't sure where the line between art and exploitation had been drawn. Yet, despite rejection, the film grew stronger in the shadows. Bootleg 5VHS tapes kept its reputation alive. By the late 1980s, critics began revisiting it as a raw reflection of American violence and parental fear. Today, it stands as both infamous and influential, a work Hollywood tried to suppress but could never erase. The Last House on the Left reminds us that sometimes the most disturbing films are the ones that reflect real fears too closely. And no matter how deep Hollywood buries them, they find a way to claw back to the surface. Number 6. Ms. 45, 1979. When Ms. 45 premiered in 1979, most audiences didn't know what to make of it. Some called it a feminist revenge fantasy. Others labeled it dangerous exploitation. Either way, the story of a mute seamstress who becomes a vigilante in New York City was unlike anything Hollywood's polished system dared to show. The premise was deceptively simple. After suffering 2 violent attacks in one day, the protagonist snaps, arming herself and targeting predatory men across the city. Her silence became her weapon, every action more chilling, because no words ever came. It wasn't the story Hollywood wanted in theaters, but it was the story that resonated in underground circles. Controversy spread quickly. Critics split down the middle. Some praised its raw intensity, while others accused it of being a grotesque exploitation of real social fears. Censors in several countries slashed entire reels, arguing it glorified vigilante justice. In the US, mainstream distributors avoided it, terrified of backlash from women's groups and conservative watchdogs alike. Behind the scenes, production was grueling. Director Abel Ferrara pushed his cast into uncomfortable territory, chasing a gritty realism that left some shaken. Rumors swirled about confrontations on set, particularly with Zoe Lund, whose haunting performance would later become iconic. Despite its low budget, the film captured a decaying New York in ways no glossy studio picture dared to reveal. The legacy grew in whispers. Bootleg VHS copies made their way through college dorms and underground theaters in the 80s. By the 1990s, Ms. 45 was hailed as a cult classic, both condemned and celebrated, dissected in feminist film studies, while still embraced by grindhouse fans. Hollywood wanted to erase it, but Ms. 45 proved impossible to forget. It's a story of silence, rage, and survival, etched into the memory of anyone brave enough to watch. Number 5. Rolling Thunder, 1977. Rolling Thunder was marketed as a straightforward revenge thriller, but audiences soon realized it was something darker. Written by Paul Schrader, the man behind Taxi Driver, it told the story of a Vietnam veteran returning home, only to be brutalized by criminals and pushed into a cycle of vengeance. What followed was unflinching, violent, and far too real for Hollywood's comfort. The premise mirrored America's post-Vietnam wounds. The returning soldier wasn't celebrated. He was broken, isolated, haunted. When his family is murdered, he arms himself with a steel claw and shotgun, turning the film into an exploration of trauma disguised as an exploitation revenge flick. Controversy hit fast. Critics accused it of glorifying violence, while veterans groups claimed it exaggerated the struggles of returning soldiers. Some theaters refused to screen it, arguing it would spark unrest. Rumors circulated that studio executives demanded cuts, toning down scenes they felt crossed the line. Production itself wasn't smooth. Schrader later admitted his script was watered down by rewrites, though the bleak tone survived. Test audiences walked out of early screenings, appalled by its relentless brutality. 20th Century Fox, embarrassed by the uproar, quietly pulled advertising and limited its release. But the film refused to vanish. Quentin Tarantino later called it one of his favorite movies, even naming his distribution company Rolling Thunder Pictures in tribute. By the 1990s, critics began re-examining it as a vital, if flawed, exploration of America's fractured soul after Vietnam. Hollywood tried to hide Rolling Thunder, but it became a cult touchstone, proof that exploitation often holds deeper truths than polished blockbusters ever dare reveal. Number 4. Switchblade Sisters, 1975. When Switchblade Sisters hit theaters in 1975, it was dismissed as cheap pulp, another gang flick from the exploitation machine. But over time, it transformed into one of the most beloved underground cult classics of the decade. The story of teenage girl gangs battling for dominance was shocking, campy, and brutally entertaining. The film followed the Dagger Debs, a girl gang fighting rivals and authority alike. What set it apart was its unapologetic grit, teen girls wielding knives, challenging police, and asserting power in a way mainstream Hollywood never allowed. Critics at the time were horrified, branding it trash unfit for theaters. Some towns outright banned it, claiming it would encourage youth violence. Behind the scenes, production was barely held together. Director Jack Hill worked with a tiny budget, relying on sheer energy and improvisation to keep the story alive. Cast members later admitted to heated clashes, with some quitting mid-shoot over the intensity of scenes. Studio executives, meanwhile, were reluctant to advertise it, fearing public backlash. The reception was disastrous. It flopped at the box office, quickly forgotten in Hollywood's official history. Yet in the shadows, it lived on. VHS tapes in the 80s gave it a second life, passed among fans who celebrated its audacity. By the 1990s, Quentin Tarantino's personal endorsement resurrected it for a new generation, screening it under his Rolling Thunder banner. Today, Switchblade Sisters is no longer dismissed. It's cherished as a raw time capsule of 70s exploitation, punk rebellion, and unapologetic chaos. Hollywood tried to bury it, but audiences refused to let it stay underground. Number 3. Death Race, 2000, 1975. At first glance, Death Race 2000 looked like a cartoonish B-movie, but behind its campy exterior lay a biting satire that Hollywood wanted to forget. Produced by Roger Corman and directed by Paul Bartel, the film imagined a dystopian America where a cross-country car race turned into a televised blood sport, drivers earning points by running over pedestrians. The premise was outrageous, but it was also unnervingly close to home. Audiences in 1975, already cynical about politics and media manipulation, recognized the sting in its humor. It mocked consumer culture, government propaganda, and America's obsession with violent entertainment. Some critics dismissed it as silly trash, but others saw it as a mirror held uncomfortably close to society's face. Controversy exploded on release. Community groups accused it of encouraging violence. In several states, theaters faced protests. Some foreign markets refused to screen it, branding it immoral. Even in the U.S., censors pressured distributors to trim the most shocking scenes. Hollywood executives tried to bury it under B-movie labels, treating it as disposable schlock. The production was as chaotic as the film itself. Filmed on a shoestring budget, the crew repurposed abandoned sets, crashed real cars, and risked injuries for stunt shots. David Carradine and a young Sylvester Stallone headlined the cast, but even their star power couldn't protect the film from critics who condemned it. Yet audiences loved it. Midnight screenings drew cult followings. In the decades that followed, the film's reputation grew. Scholars began dissecting it as political satire, while fans celebrated it as gleeful grindhouse chaos. It even spawned remakes and reboots, proof that Hollywood couldn't bury its influence forever. In the end, Death Race 2000 proved that exploitation cinema could deliver social critique sharper than most prestige dramas. What Hollywood dismissed as trash became a lasting cult phenomenon. Number 2. Foxy Brown, 1974. Pam Grier's Foxy Brown wasn't just a film, it was a revolution. Marketed as a tough, stylish revenge thriller, it quickly became the defining film of 70s blaxploitation. But its raw portrayal of corruption, power, and vengeance scared Hollywood enough to try and bury its cultural fire. The story followed Foxy, a woman taking revenge against a drug syndicate after her boyfriend is murdered. Armed with wit, fury, and undeniable charisma, Grier's performance electrified audiences. Here was a heroine Hollywood had never allowed before, unapologetically strong, fearless, and commanding the screen on her own terms. But controversy was inevitable. Some critics accused it of glamorizing violence. Others claimed it reinforced stereotypes, even while audiences embraced Grier as an icon of empowerment. The NAACP and other groups debated its cultural value, while certain theaters in conservative towns refused to book it at all. Hollywood studios grew nervous, branding it a passing fad rather than celebrating its success. Behind the scenes, the budget was modest, but director Jack Hill leaned into style over polish. Grier performed many of her own stunts, adding authenticity to her explosive fight scenes. Rumors swirled of heated clashes with producers over how far the violence could go. Still, the energy on set translated into a film that radiated defiance. Its aftermath was complicated. The film initially struggled with critics, but thrived at the box office. Over time, its legacy only grew. Today, Foxy Brown is hailed as one of the most important exploitation films ever made, inspiring generations of filmmakers and cementing Pam Grier as a trailblazer. Hollywood tried to minimize its significance, but the people never let it die. Foxy Brown remains a testament to power, resilience, and the dangerous brilliance of 70s exploitation. Number 1. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. Few films reshaped horror and exploitation cinema like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. When it roared into theaters in 1974, it terrified audiences not with polished special effects, but with relentless atmosphere, grimy realism, and sheer nerve. What started as a low-budget independent film quickly became one of the most controversial movies of its decade. The story followed a group of friends who stumble upon a family of cannibalistic killers in rural Texas. But what shocked audiences wasn't just the violence, it was the oppressive, documentary-like realism. Viewers swore they'd seen gore that wasn't actually there, a psychological trick born from the film's raw cinematography and unsettling sound design. Controversy hit instantly. Many theaters refused to show it. The MPAA gave it an X rating at first, forcing edits. In several countries, it was banned outright. Some critics called it depraved filth. Others admitted it was genius. Hollywood distanced itself, treating the movie like a dangerous outsider rather than acknowledging its artistry. Behind the scenes, the chaos was legendary. Filmed in sweltering Texas heat, actors endured grueling conditions, shooting for 16 hours a day in a house filled with rotting meat props. Crew members fainted, fights broke out, and Gunnar Hansen's Leatherface performance was so intense, some cast members avoided him off set. But despite everything, the film became a sensation. It grossed over $30 million worldwide on a budget of less than $150,000. Bootleg screenings kept it alive, and by the 1980s, it was enshrined as one of the most influential horror films ever made. Today, its DNA runs through every slasher and survival horror story. Hollywood tried to bury it under labels of exploitation. Instead, it rose to legend. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre proved that sometimes the scariest movies are the ones that look too real to be just stories. The 1970s were a graveyard of films Hollywood wanted erased. Too raw, too dangerous, too real. Yet every one of these so-called buried movies found a way back. They remind us that art, no matter how messy, refuses silence. Which of these shocking cult classics have you seen? Comment below, like this video, and subscribe for more forgotten cinematic secrets.